The Vampire King arrived at the steel gates of Ashridge exactly 3 minutes before sunset, and the guards spat at her feet. Serelith Dravenor had lived for 847 years. She had watched empires crumble and rise again. She had bathed in the blood of enemies who dared challenge her throne. She had commanded armies that made mortals weep and pray for mercy. And now, standing before these ridiculous wrought iron barriers that separated the human world from what they believed was their precious safety, she felt something she hadn't experienced in centuries: genuine, cold fury. "No freaks past the checkpoint," the guard said, adjusting his assault rifle with all the confidence of someone who had no idea what stood before him. His nameplate read Morrison. "Especially not your kind. Turn around and crawl back to whatever hole you came from." Serelith stood perfectly still, her white hair cascading over her shoulders like fresh snow, her alabaster skin almost luminous in the dying light. She wore a gown that had cost more than this guard's annual salary, deep crimson silk that whispered against the cobblestones. Her red eyes, bright as arterial blood, fixed on Morrison with the intensity of a predator watching prey fumble in its final moments. "I have been invited," she said, her voice soft as velvet and sharp as glass, "by your council, to discuss the treaty violations your kingdom has committed against my people." Morrison laughed, and the two guards beside him joined in. One was younger, barely out of his teens, with nervous energy that made him shift from foot to foot. The other was older, grizzled, with scars across his knuckles that suggested he'd seen combat. Neither understood the magnitude of their mistake. "We don't negotiate with bloodsuckers," Morrison said. "Council's decision came down this morning. All vampire delegations are denied entry, indefinitely. So do us all a favor and disappear." The younger guard noticed something then: how still Serelith was. How her chest didn't rise and fall with breath, how her fingers, long and elegant, had begun to curl into fists. "Sir," he whispered, "maybe we should call the captain." "Shut it, Collins." Serelith took one step forward. The temperature around the gate dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Frost began to crawl across the metal bars, spreading like a living thing, crystallizing into intricate patterns that reflected the fading sunlight. "You have made," she said slowly, "a catastrophic error." Then she turned, her gown sweeping behind her, and walked back toward the dark sedan waiting 50 yards away. The guards watched her go, Morrison grinning like he'd won something. Inside the car, Serelith's second-in-command, Varric Shadowmere, sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap. His white hair was shorter than hers, styled back from his sharp features, and his dark suit was immaculate. When she settled into the seat beside him, he didn't need to ask what had happened. He could smell the rage coming off her in waves. "They refused you," he said. "They insulted me. At their own gate. After we rode 3 days to reach this pathetic excuse for a kingdom." Serelith's hands trembled slightly. "After we came in good faith to address their violations of the blood accords. After our people have been slaughtered in their territories without consequence." Varric nodded once. "What are your orders?" "Gather the court. Send word through every vampire territory from here to the eastern shores." Her eyes blazed crimson in the growing darkness. "In 72 hours, if Ashridge has not delivered a formal apology and those responsible for this disrespect, I will reduce their kingdom to ashes, every building, every bridge, every monument they pride themselves on. I will make them understand what it means to dishonor vampire royalty. Consider it done." Varric pulled out his phone, already typing messages that would reach the most powerful vampires in the modern world within minutes. "And the humans inside? The civilians? They have 72 hours to evacuate or pledge to remove their current leadership. I will not harm those who show proper respect, but those who spat at my feet, those who laughed." Her smile was terrible and beautiful. "They will beg for death long before I grant it." The car pulled away from the gate, disappearing into the dusk. Behind them, Morrison and his fellow guards celebrated their perceived victory with crude jokes and cigarettes, completely unaware that they had just signed their kingdom's death warrant. 30 miles away, in the heart of Ashridge, Thea Patterson was having the worst shift of her life. The emergency room was overflowing. A multi-car pileup on the highway had brought in 17 patients, 3 critical, and the hospital was understaffed as always. Thea's scrubs were stained with blood from a patient she'd spent 2 hours trying to stabilize, only to lose him on the table. She was exhausted, running on coffee and determination, her dark hair falling out of its ponytail as she rushed between rooms. "Patterson!" Dr. Reeves barked from the trauma bay. "I need you here now," she ran, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Another patient, another emergency. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. Her shift had ended at 11, but there was no way she could leave now, not when people were dying. She was good at her job. At 26, Thea was one of the most capable trauma nurses in Ashridge Memorial. She had steady hands, a calm demeanor under pressure, and an instinct for knowing what doctors needed before they asked. But tonight, every save felt like a small victory against an ocean of loss. By 3 in the morning, the rush had finally calmed. Thea stood in the break room, washing blood from her hands and forearms, watching the pink-tinged water spiral down the drain. She caught her reflection in the mirror above the sink, pale skin made paler by fluorescent lights, dark circles under her hazel eyes, a bruise forming on her shoulder from where a patient had grabbed her during a seizure. Her phone buzzed. A text from her roommate. "Did you hear about the vampire thing? It's all over the news." Thea frowned, drying her hands. She pulled up a news app and scanned the headlines. Her blood went cold. Vampire King threatens Ashridge. 72 hours to Complir faced dissection. The article detailed an incident at the border checkpoint. A vampire delegation led by someone called Saralith Dravenor had been denied entry and insulted by guards. In response, the Vampire King and Thea's mind stuttered on that, because apparently vampires had kings now, and apparently that king was a woman, had issued an ultimatum. Apologize and deliver those responsible or watch Ashridge burn. The council's response had been swift and predictably stupid. "We do not negotiate with monsters." "Oh God," Thea whispered. She'd grown up knowing vampires existed. Everyone did. Ever since the Great Revelation 20 years ago, when vampire communities had revealed themselves to the modern world. There had been treaties, accords, careful diplomatic relations. Vampires mostly kept to themselves in their own territories. Ancient and powerful and deeply strange, most humans went their entire lives without seeing one in person. But everyone knew the rules. You didn't disrespect vampire nobility. You didn't break the blood accords. And you absolutely, under no circumstances, insulted a vampire king. "We're dead," said Marcus Chen, one of the ER doctors. From the doorway, he'd been reading the same news. "The council has lost their minds. Do they know what vampire royalty can do?" "Evacuations are starting in the morning," Thea said, reading further. "They're opening the southern routes, telling people to head for Glendale or Riverside and go where. Most people can't just leave. They have homes, jobs, families." Marcus rubbed his face. "This is insane." Thea thought about her apartment, her life here. She'd worked so hard to get where she was. Ashridge Memorial had given her a chance when other hospitals had passed her over. She had patients who depended on her, colleagues who'd become friends. The thought of abandoning it all because some guards had been idiots made her want to scream. But the alternative was facing the wrath of a vampire king. And that, according to every credible source, was a death sentence. "I'm not leaving," she found herself saying. Marcus looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "Thea, someone needs to stay. If there's violence, if people get hurt, this hospital needs to be operational. I'm not abandoning my post because the council made a stupid mistake." She squared her shoulders, feeling something settle in her chest. Determination, maybe, or just exhaustion making her reckless. "I'm staying. You're insane." "Probably." She grabbed her bag. "I'm going home to sleep for 4 hours, then I'll be back. Tell Dr. Reeves I'm volunteering for the emergency preparedness team." She left before Marcus could argue further, stepping out into the cool night air. Ashridge was beautiful at this hour-old, street lamps casting golden light on cobblestone streets, historic buildings with their Gothic architecture, church spires reaching toward the stars. It was a kingdom that prided itself on tradition and history, on its independence and strength. And in 72 hours, if nothing changed, it would all be gone. Thea walked home through empty streets, her mind racing. There had to be a solution, some way to fix this that didn't involve thousands of people dying or losing everything. The guards had made the mistake, not the entire kingdom. Surely someone could make the Vampire King understand that. She climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, unlocked the door, and collapsed onto her bed without even changing. Sleep came quickly, but it was fitful, full of dreams about white-haired figures with red eyes and cities burning under moonless skies. When she woke, Ashridge was in chaos. The evacuation had begun, and the streets were clogged with cars, people shouting, horns blaring. Thea watched from her window as neighbors loaded possessions into vehicles, as families argued about what to take and what to leave behind. The panic was palpable, spreading like a virus through the population. She checked her phone. 48 hours remained. The council had issued another statement. "We stand firm against supernatural tyranny. Ashridge will not bow to threats." The guards responsible had been identified but not arrested. Morrison Collins, and the third guard Patterson read his name as Warren had been placed on administrative leave but were otherwise free. The council was treating them like heroes, not the architects of potential catastrophe. Thea felt rage bubble up in her chest. This was madness. Complete, absolute madness. She pulled on fresh scrubs, grabbed her work bag, and headed for the hospital. The streets were even more chaotic than they'd looked from above. People were desperate, scared, and angry. She saw fights breaking out over parking spaces, families weeping as they said goodbye to homes they'd lived in for generations. At the hospital, the emergency department was preparing for the worst. Supply rooms were being stocked, trauma bays cleared, disaster protocols reviewed. The remaining staff, and there weren't many who'd chosen to stay, worked with grim determination. Patterson, Dr. Reeves said when he saw her. Didn't expect you to actually come back. Where else would I be? He smiled, tired but genuine. We're lucky to have you. I need you coordinating triage protocols. If the vampires actually attack, we'll be dealing with casualties unlike anything we've trained for. Thea spent the day working, but her mind kept drifting. She thought about the vampire king Seralith Drevenor. What kind of person issued an ultimatum like this? Was she truly a monster, or was this about honor and respect in a way humans didn't understand? Vampire culture was ancient, bound by codes and traditions that seemed bizarre to modern sensibilities. But they were codes nonetheless, rules that governed behavior and consequences. The guards had violated those rules. They had disrespected a diplomatic delegation, spat at royalty, laughed at a king who had come in peace. Maybe, Thea thought, the vampire king wasn't the villain here. That night she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find Seralith Drevenor and apologize herself. It was insane. Completely, utterly insane. But someone had to do something, and the council clearly wasn't going to. If she could reach the vampire king, if she could explain that not everyone in Ashridge supported what had happened, maybe, just maybe, she could buy them more time or at least save some lives. Thea spent hours researching, digging through internet forums and obscure vampire lore sites, trying to figure out where vampire royalty stayed when they traveled. Finally, she found a reference to an old estate 20 miles outside Ashridge's borders, Ravencroft Manor, supposedly owned by vampire nobility for centuries but rarely used. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. She didn't tell anyone what she was planning. She simply left the hospital after her shift, got in her beat-up sedan, and drove into the night. The roads were still clogged with evacuees heading south, but Thea went west, toward the border, toward what she hoped was the Vampire King's temporary residence. Ravencroft Manor appeared through the darkness like something out of a Gothic novel. It was massive, all stone and turrets and iron gates, surrounded by ancient trees that blocked out the moonlight. Lights glowed in several windows, warm and golden, suggesting occupancy. Thea parked her car outside the gates and walked up to the entrance. There were no guards, no obvious security, just an intercom system mounted on the stone pillar. She pressed the button, her heart hammering against her ribs. Silence. Then a male voice, accented and cultured. State your business. My name is Thea Patterson. I'm from Ashridge. I need to speak with Seralith Drevenor. A pause. You're human. Yes. Are you aware that presenting yourself at a vampire court uninvited and unannounced is considered extremely rude and potentially suicidal? Thea swallowed. I'm aware, but I need to speak with her. It's about what happened at the gate, please. Another pause, longer this time. Then the gates began to open, smooth and silent. Follow the drive to the main entrance. Do not deviate from the path. Do not touch anything. And do not run. Predators chase things that run. Understood, Thea said, though her voice shook slightly. She walked up the long, winding drive, her sneakers crunching on gravel. The manor loomed larger as she approached, impossibly grand, with architecture that seemed to predate Ashridge itself. Gargoyles perched on the corners of the roof, their stone eyes watching her progress. The front doors opened before she reached them. A figure stood silhouetted against the light, tall, inhumanly graceful, with white hair and pale skin that seemed to glow. Not Seralith, Thea realized. This was a man dressed in an impeccable dark suit with red eyes that assessed her with clinical precision. I am Varric Shadowmere, he said. Second to the throne and advisor to King Seralith. You have considerable courage coming here. Thea Patterson, or considerable stupidity. We shall see which. I need to speak with her, Thea repeated, climbing the steps to stand before him. Up close, she could see he was beautiful in the way all vampires seem to be, otherworldly, perfect, and deeply unnerving. I know what the guards did was unforgivable. I know the council has responded with arrogance and disrespect. But not everyone in Ashridge supports their actions. We're not all like them. Varric studied her for a long moment. You came here alone? Without the council's knowledge? Yes. To do what exactly? Apologize on behalf of people who would likely condemn you for this action? If it helps. If it saves lives. Yes. Thea met his red eyes, refusing to look away despite every instinct screaming at her to run. I'm a nurse. I save lives. It's what I do. And I can't stand by and watch thousands of people die because a few idiots couldn't show basic respect. A smile flickered across Varric's face, there and gone. Wait here. He disappeared into the manor, moving faster than Thea's eyes could follow. She stood in the doorway, trembling slightly, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. When Varric returned, he wasn't alone. Seralith Drevenor was the most beautiful and terrifying person Thea had ever seen. She glided more than walked, her crimson gown flowing around her like liquid, her white hair cascading past her waist. Her skin was porcelain pale, flawless, and her eyes, those blood-red eyes, held centuries of knowledge and power. She looked at Thea the way a queen might regard an interesting insect. So, Saralith said, her voice soft and deadly, you are the human who dares approach me without invitation, without offering, without proper protocol. Explain why I shouldn't kill you where you stand. Thea's mouth went dry, but she'd come this far, she couldn't back down now. Because I'm trying to fix what others broke, she said, forcing strength into her voice. What happened at the gate was wrong, disrespectful, ignorant, and cruel. You deserved better. You came in peace and you were treated like garbage. I'm here to apologize for that. Not on behalf of the council, they can rot for all I care, but on behalf of the people of Ashridge who don't deserve to die for someone else's stupidity. Saralith moved closer, and Thea had to force herself not to step back. The Vampire King was taller than her by several inches, and the power radiating from her was almost physical. She could feel it pressing against her skin, making her heartbeat visible in her throat. You think an apology from one insignificant human will satisfy me? Saralith asked. You think your words carry enough weight to erase the insult I suffered? No, Thea admitted, but I had to try, because doing nothing felt worse than dying here. Saralith tilted her head, studying Thea with unsettling intensity. You're afraid, I can hear your heartbeat, smell your fear, yet you stand before me. Why? Because fear doesn't excuse inaction. I see horrible things every day in the emergency room, people broken, dying, suffering. And I help them anyway, even when I'm terrified, because it's the right thing to do. Thea took a breath. You're angry. You have every right to be. But destroying Ashridge won't make you feel better. It'll just add to the violence and suffering in this world. And I think maybe you're better than that. Something flickered in Saralith's eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or interest. She circled Thea slowly, like a predator assessing prey. You presume to know what I am? To understand my nature? No. I don't know anything about you except what I've read in the last 24 hours. But I know that someone who honors ancient codes and protocols, someone who bothers to follow diplomatic channels and travel for negotiations, that person isn't a mindless monster. You're angry because you were disrespected, not because you want to kill. There's a difference. Saralith stopped directly in front of her. Tell me, Thea Patterson, why did you stay when others fled? You could have evacuated with the rest. The hospital needs staff. If violence comes, people will need medical care. I couldn't leave knowing I might save lives by staying. Even if it means your own death? Even then. Saralith regarded her for a long, silent moment. Then she turned to Varric. Leave us, my king. Leave us. Varric bowed and disappeared into the depths of the manor. Thea was suddenly, acutely aware that she was alone with one of the most powerful vampires in existence, in a place where no one would hear her scream. But Saralith didn't attack. Instead, she walked to a sitting room visible through an archway and gestured for Thea to follow. Come, if you're going to waste my time with human nobility, we might as well be comfortable. The room was stunning antique furniture, priceless artwork, a fireplace that crackled with real flames. Saralith settled into a high-backed chair with the grace of someone who had been doing exactly this for centuries. She gestured to the seat across from her. Thea sat, perching on the edge of the chair, ready to bolt if necessary. 847 years. Saralith said suddenly, that is how long I have existed. I have seen kingdoms rise and fall. I have negotiated treaties, ended wars, built alliances that lasted centuries. I am not some fledgling vampire with no understanding of diplomacy or restraint. I believe you, Thea said quietly, and yet your council treats me like a common criminal. Your guards spit at my feet. They laugh at me as if I am nothing. The rage in Saralith's voice was controlled but absolute. For 800 years I have worked to build peace between our kinds. The blood accords are sacred to me, and Ashridge has violated them repeatedly, hunting parties in vampire territories, attacks on our people, murders without consequence. I came to address these violations peacefully, and I was turned away like filth. Thea felt her own anger rising, not at Saralith, but at the council, at Morrison and the other guards, at the arrogance that had brought them to this point. You're right, all of it, and if I could drag those guards here and make them apologize themselves, I would. But I can't. I'm just a nurse. I have no power, no authority. All I have is the ability to tell you that I'm sorry, that what happened was wrong, and that if you give us time, maybe we can fix this. How? Saralith leaned forward slightly. Your council has made their position clear. They will not apologize. They will not deliver those responsible. They believe themselves untouchable. Then we go around them, Thea said, the idea forming as she spoke. The people of Ashridge, the ones who are still here, we could organize. Protest, force the council to act. Public pressure can accomplish things that diplomacy can't, and if it doesn't work, then at least I tried. At least I stood up and said this wasn't okay. At least I acknowledged your pain and your right to justice. Thea met Saralith's eyes. I can't promise I'll succeed, but I can promise I'll fight for what's right, for whatever that's worth. Saralith was quiet for a long time, studying Thea with an expression that was impossible to read. Finally, she spoke. I will give you 48 hours. If at the end of that time the council has not issued a formal apology and delivered the 3 guards responsible for my disrespect, I will proceed with my original plan. Ashridge will burn 48 hours, Thea repeated. It wasn't much, but it was something. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. You have committed yourself to an impossible task. Saarlith stood and Thea did the same. And Thea Patterson, if you fail, if you return here without success, I will not kill you. You have shown courage and honor. But I will not spare your city for your sake alone. Do you understand? I understand. Saarlith moved closer, and Thea's breath caught. Up close, the Vampire King was devastating, beautiful, and terrible in equal measure, with eyes that seemed to look straight through to her soul. There is something about you, Saarlith murmured. Something that makes me want to believe humans are capable of better. Don't disappoint me. Then she stepped back and the moment broke. Varric appeared as if summoned. Escort our guest to the gate. Make sure she reaches her vehicle safely. The drive back to Ashridge passed in a blur. Thea's hands shook on the steering wheel. Adrenaline and terror, and something else coursing through her system. She'd done it. She'd faced the Vampire King and survived. More than that, she'd bought them time. Now she just had to figure out how to use it. She arrived back in Ashridge as dawn broke, the city still in chaos. But Thea had a plan now, or the beginnings of one. She went straight to the hospital and found Dr. Reeves, Marcus, and the other staff members who had stayed. I need your help, she said. All of you. We're going to force the council to do the right thing. Over the next hours, Thea organized. She reached out to everyone she knew, nurses, doctors, teachers, shopkeepers, anyone who had chosen to stay in Ashridge. She used social media, spreading the message that the Vampire King had been disrespected, that the council was refusing to fix their mistake, and that it was going to get them all killed. The response was overwhelming. People were angry, scared and angry and desperate for a solution that didn't involve abandoning their homes or facing destruction. Within 12 hours, Thea had hundreds of people ready to protest. They gathered in the central square, in front of the council building, with signs and chants demanding action. Apologize to the Vampire King. Justice for Saarlith Dravenor. Fire the guards. News crews arrived, broadcasting the protests across the region. The story went viral, a small human population standing up to their own government, demanding they show respect to vampire royalty or face the consequences. The council tried to ignore them at first, issuing statements about not bowing to pressure. But as the protest grew, as more people joined and the international community began to take notice, their position became untenable. Thea stood at the front of the crowd, megaphone in hand, leading chants and speaking to journalists. She was exhausted, running on coffee and determination, but she couldn't stop, not when they were so close. The Vampire King came here in peace, she shouted to the crowd and the cameras. She came to address legitimate violations of the Blood Accords, treaties that protect both humans and vampires, and our guards spat at her feet. They laughed at her. They treated a diplomatic delegation with contempt. This isn't about bowing to monsters. This is about basic decency and respect. This is about acknowledging when we're wrong and making it right. The crowd roared in agreement. Thea saw familiar faces, colleagues from the hospital, her neighbors, people she'd grown up with. They were united in this, at least. United in their understanding that the council had screwed up and needed to fix it. By the 36-hour mark, cracks began to show in the council's resolve. 2 members issued statements supporting an apology. Then 3. Then the majority. Morrison and the other guards were arrested quietly and without fanfare. The council drafted a formal apology, though it was clear they hated every word, but it still wasn't enough. Thea knew Saarlith wouldn't accept half measures or political maneuvering. The apology had to be genuine, delivered properly, with the respect that should have been shown from the beginning. So Thea went back to Ravencroft Manor. It was late afternoon when she arrived, the sun low on the horizon. Varric met her at the gate, his expression unreadable. You return with less than 12 hours remaining, he observed. Bold or foolish, I still cannot decide which. I need to speak with her. The council has agreed to apologize and turn over the guards. But I need to deliver the message properly. I need to make sure she knows that I fought for this. Varric studied her, then nodded once. Follow me. Saarlith was in the library this time, a vast room filled with books that looked older than countries. She stood by a window, watching the sunset, her white hair catching the golden light. She didn't turn when Thea entered. You have been busy, Saarlith said softly. I have been watching the news. Quite the little revolutionary you've become. I did what needed to be done. Thea approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. The council has agreed to your terms. They're preparing a formal apology, and the 3 guards responsible have been arrested. They'll be delivered to you for justice, whatever form you deem appropriate. And you organized all of this. One human nurse with no political power or connections. I wasn't alone, there were hundreds of us. People who understand that respect and honor matter, even in modern times. People who didn't want to see their city destroyed because of someone else's arrogance. Thea took a breath. I know it doesn't erase what happened. I know words can't undo the disrespect you suffered, but we tried. We fought for what was right. Serilith finally turned, and Thea was struck again by her devastating beauty. But there was something different in her expression now, something softer than rage, though no less intense. You are remarkable, the Vampire King said quietly. In 8 centuries I have met precious few humans who possessed your courage and integrity. You faced me knowing I could kill you. You organized a revolution knowing you might fail. You did all of this for people who may never know or appreciate what you risked. She moved closer, graceful as silk. Why, truly, why does this matter so much to you? Thea considered the question seriously. Because I believe in doing what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You deserved respect and didn't receive it. That's wrong, and wrong things should be corrected. It's not complicated. It is to most of your kind. Serilith was very close now, close enough that Thea could see the intricate patterns in her red eyes, could feel the coldness that radiated from her undead form. Tell me, Thea Patterson, are you afraid of me? Yes, Thea admitted. Terrified, actually. You could kill me without effort. You've lived longer than my entire family line has probably existed. You command power I can't begin to understand. Of course I'm afraid. And yet you keep returning. Fear isn't a good enough reason not to do the right thing. Something in Serilith's expression shifted a crack in the regal, controlled exterior. You make me want to believe in humanity again, she murmured. You make me remember why I fought so hard for the blood accords, for peace between our kinds. You remind me that honor and courage still exist in this world. I'm just a nurse, Thea said, though her heart was racing. I'm nobody special. You are wrong. Serilith reached out, her pale fingers brushing Thea's cheek with surprising gentleness. Her touch was cool, not quite cold, and Thea shivered. You are extraordinary, and I find myself reluctant to let you leave. Thea's breath caught. There was something in those words, in the way Serilith looked at her, that made her stomach flip. I should get back. The council wants to deliver their apology formally tomorrow at sunset. They're asking if you'll receive a delegation. I will receive you, Serilith said. Only you. If the council wishes to apologize, they may send their words through you. You have earned the right to stand as their emissary. Me? But I'm not. You are the only human in Ashridge who has shown me proper respect and honor. You are the only one whose word I trust. Serilith's hand lingered on Thea's face. Come tomorrow at sunset. Bring the written apology and confirmation that the guards have been detained. And Thea, wear something other than those medical garments. You will be attending vampire court, and there are protocols. Thea nodded, her mouth dry. I'll be here. She returned to Ashridge in a daze, her mind spinning. The way Serilith had looked at her, touched her, it had been unexpected, charged with something Thea didn't quite understand but felt in every nerve. The next day was a blur of preparation. The council was furious that Serilith would only receive Thea, but they had no choice. They drafted a formal apology, full of diplomatic language and acknowledgments of fault. The 3 guards, Morrison, Collins, and Warren, were placed in custody, ready to be transported to vampire justice. Thea borrowed a dress from a friend, something simple but elegant in deep blue, and tried not to think about the fact that she was about to represent an entire kingdom before vampire royalty. She was just a nurse. This was insane, but she'd started this, and she would finish it. At sunset she returned to Ravencroft Manor. This time the gates opened immediately, and Varric was waiting with what might have been approval in his red eyes. You clean up well, human, he said. The king is waiting in the throne room. Follow the main hall to the end. Do not wander. The throne room was magnificent vaulted ceilings, ancient tapestries, and at the far end a throne carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light. Serilith sat upon it, regal and terrible, dressed in a gown of midnight blue that matched Thea's dress almost perfectly. Her white hair was arranged in an intricate style, and her red eyes glowed in the firelight from braziers that lined the walls. Other vampires were present, Varric and several others Thea didn't recognize, all pale and beautiful and dangerous. This was the court, she realized. Vampire nobility gathered to hear the apology. Thea walked forward, her footsteps echoing in the vast space, until she stood before the throne. She dropped into a curtsy, hoping she was doing it correctly. Rise, Thea Patterson, Serilith said, her voice formal and commanding. You come as emissary of Ashridge. Speak. Thea straightened, pulled the written apology from her bag, and began to read. The council's words were diplomatic but genuine, acknowledging the disrespect shown to Serilith, apologizing for the violation of protocol, and offering the guards responsible for justice. Thea added her own words at the end, speaking from the heart. On behalf of the people of Ashridge, who fought to make this right, who protested and demanded justice, I offer our deepest apologies. What was done to you was wrong. You deserved honor and received insult. We hope this apology and the delivery of those responsible can begin to repair the damage." Silence filled the throne room. Serelith stood, descending the steps with liquid grace, until she stood before Thea. The vampire court watched intently. "I accept the apology of Ashridge," Serelith declared. "The guards responsible will face vampire justice. The blood accords will be honored, and the kingdom will be spared destruction." She paused, her gaze fixed on Thea. "But there is a price." Thea's stomach dropped. "What price?" "You, Thea Patterson, will remain here as Ashridge's ambassador to the vampire court. You will serve as liaison between your people and mine, ensuring that such disrespect never occurs again. You will live here, at Ravencroft Manor, under my protection and authority." The room erupted in whispers from the vampire nobility. Varric looked shocked, and Thea felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. What?" she managed. "You are the only human I trust to maintain the peace. The only one who has demonstrated understanding and respect. I am offering you a position of great honor, and before you refuse, know that I am also offering you protection. The council will not be pleased with you after this. You have made powerful enemies among your own kind. Here you will be safe." Thea's mind raced. Leave Ashridge, leave her job, her life, everything she knew, to live among vampires, in service to a king who terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. But Serelith was right. The council would see her as a traitor, someone who had sided with vampires against human interests. And the position she was being offered, ambassador, liaison, it was important, critical even. Someone needed to bridge the gap between humans and vampires to prevent future conflicts. "Can I still practice medicine?" Thea asked. "I'm a nurse, it's who I am, I can't give that up." Serelith smiled and it transformed her face. "There are humans in the territories who need medical care. Vampires too sometimes. Your skills would be valued. You would have access to resources beyond what your hospital could provide. And you would save more lives than you could imagine." Thea looked around the throne room, at the ancient beauty and power surrounding her. Then she looked at Serelith, at the vampire king who had somehow seen worth in her, who had offered her protection and purpose. "I accept," she said. The vampire court erupted in conversation, but Serelith raised a hand and silence fell immediately. "It is decided. Thea Patterson is now an honored member of this court and Ashridge's ambassador. She is under my personal protection. Any who threaten her will answer to me." The formality dissolved then, vampires approaching to introduce themselves, to welcome her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. Varric shook her hand, his grip cool but firm. "You've made an interesting choice, human," he said quietly. "The king does not offer her protection lightly. You must have impressed her greatly." "I just did what was right," Thea said, still feeling overwhelmed. "Precisely." Later, after the formalities had concluded and the court had dispersed, Serelith showed Thea to her new quarters, a suite of rooms that were larger and more luxurious than her entire apartment in Ashridge. There was a bedroom with a massive 4-poster bed, a sitting room with a fireplace, and a bathroom that belonged in a palace. "This is too much," Thea protested. "This is appropriate for someone of your new station." Serelith moved to the window, gazing out at the darkness. "I meant what I said, Thea. You impressed me. You stood before me when others fled. You fought for what was right when others accepted injustice. You reminded me why I have worked for peace the past centuries." Thea joined her at the window, maintaining a respectful distance. "Why do you care so much about peace? You're powerful enough to take whatever you want. Why bother with treaties and diplomacy? Because violence begets violence. Because I have seen enough death to last 1,000 lifetimes. Because," Serelith paused, something vulnerable flickering across her face. "Because I am tired, Thea. Tired of war, of conflict, of the endless cycle of revenge and bloodshed. I want to build something better, and I cannot do it alone." Without thinking, Thea reached out and touched Serelith's hand. The vampire king stiffened, surprised, but didn't pull away. Her skin was cool beneath Thea's fingers, smooth as marble. "You're not alone," Thea said softly. "I'm here, and I'll help you build that better world, whatever it takes." Serelith turned to face her fully, and the intensity in her gaze made Thea's breath catch. "You have no idea what you do to me," the vampire king whispered. "How you make me feel things I thought long dead. How you remind me of what it means to hope." "Serelith." The vampire king stepped closer, her hand coming up to cup Thea's face with impossible gentleness. "I am 847 years old. I have known countless beings, human and vampire alike, but none have affected me the way you have. Your courage, your compassion, your absolute refusal to back down in the face of fear, you are magnificent." Thea's heart was thundering so loudly, she was certain Serelith could hear it. If you say you are just a nurse one more time, I will be very cross with you." Serelith's thumb traced Thea's cheekbone. "You are extraordinary, and I find myself wanting things I have not wanted in a very long time." "What things?" Thea breathed. Instead of answering with words, Serelith leaned in slowly, giving Thea every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, when Thea stood frozen and breathless, the Vampire King kissed her. It was gentle, surprisingly so, cool lips against warm, and a sensation that sent electricity racing through Thea's entire body. Serelith's hand cradled her face like something precious, and Thea found herself leaning into the kiss, her own hands coming up to rest against the vampire's shoulders. When they parted, both were breathing unevenly, or at least Thea was, Serelith's chest rising and falling in unconscious mimicry of human habit. "I should not have done that," Serelith said, though she made no move to step away. "You are under my protection. It is inappropriate to." "I kissed you back," Thea interrupted. "I wanted that. I want." She trailed off, not quite sure how to articulate the tangle of emotions in her chest. Fear and attraction, curiosity and desire all mixed together in a way that made her dizzy. "This is complicated," Serelith warned. "I am not human. I will never age, never change. You are mortal, fragile, with a lifespan that is a blink compared to mine. Any relationship between us would be unequal, difficult, and potentially heartbreaking. So we shouldn't even try," Thea challenged. "I did not say that." Serelith smiled, and it was warm, genuine. "I am simply ensuring you understand what you would be agreeing to. If we pursue this, I will be possessive, protective to a fault, jealous of anything that threatens your safety or happiness. Vampire affection is intense and consuming. I will not apologize for my nature. I'm not asking you to." Thea took a breath. "I don't know what this is between us. It's terrifying and exhilarating and completely insane, but I want to find out. If you do, I very much do." Serelith kissed her again, deeper this time, and Thea melted into it, into the cool strength of the Vampire King's embrace, into the impossibility of this moment. They stood there for a long time, learning the shape of each other, exploring this new and unexpected connection. Outside, the moon rose over Ravencroft Manor, casting silver light across ancient grounds. And inside, two beings from different worlds took the first steps toward something neither had anticipated but both desperately wanted. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Thea adapted to life at Ravencroft Manor with surprising ease. She established a medical clinic in one of the unused wings, treating both humans from nearby villages and vampires who needed care. Serelith provided her with resources beyond anything she'd had at Ashridge Memorial: advanced equipment, rare medicines, access to ancient vampire healing knowledge. But more than the work, Thea discovered what it meant to be courted by vampire royalty. Serelith was attentive, lavishing her with gifts that showed careful attention to Thea's interests: rare medical texts, comfortable scrubs and fabrics that felt like silk, a state-of-the-art surgical suite built to her exact specifications. But it was the small gestures that meant more. Finding Serelith reading in the library at dawn, waiting for Thea to finish her shift so they could talk, having her favorite tea always available, the exact temperature she preferred. The way Serelith would brush her fingers through Thea's hair while they sat together, touch starved from centuries of isolation. The Vampire King was, as she'd warned, intensely protective. When a diplomat from a neighboring territory made a disparaging comment about humans, Serelith's response had been swift and terrifying. The diplomat barely escaped with his life. When Thea mentioned feeling homesick, Serelith arranged for her friends from Ashridge to visit, complete with security and accommodations. "You don't have to do all this," Thea said one evening, curled up in Serelith's arms on a sofa in the library. The vampire was cool to the touch, but Thea had learned to appreciate the contrast to her own warmth. "I do, though," Serelith replied, her fingers tracing patterns on Thea's shoulder. "You gave up your life in Ashridge for this position. The least I can do is ensure you are happy here." "I am happy." Thea tilted her head to look up at the Vampire King. "Happier than I've been in a long time, actually. The work is fulfilling, I'm making a real difference, and I get to spend my evenings with you. What more could I want?" Serelith's expression softened. "You deserve everything, Thea, and I intend to give it to you." They kissed, slow and sweet, and Thea felt the now familiar flutter in her stomach. Being with Serelith was intoxicating. The vampire's centuries of experience combined with genuine affection created a combination that left Thea breathless. But it wasn't always easy. There were cultural differences to navigate, misunderstandings born from Serelith's ancient worldview clashing with Thea's modern sensibilities. There were moments when the Vampire King's possessiveness bordered on stifling, when Thea had to firmly establish boundaries. "I'm not a possession," Thea said during one particularly tense conversation. "I'm your partner. That means treating me as an equal, not something to be protected and controlled." Serelith had looked stricken. "I do not see you as a possession. I see you as something precious, something the world might try to take from me. I have lost much in my long life, Thea. The thought of losing you is unbearable. Then trust me to take care of myself. Trust that I'm strong enough to handle the challenges that come with this position." Thea took Serelith's cool hands in hers. "I need space to be who I am, to do my work, to make my own choices. I can't breathe if you're constantly hovering." It had been a difficult conversation, but Serelith had listened. She'd adjusted, giving Thea more independence while still maintaining that fierce protectiveness that seemed intrinsic to her nature. They learned to compromise, to communicate, to build something that honored both their needs. 3 months after Thea had first walked through the gates of Ravencroft Manor, the Council of Ashridge requested a formal meeting. Relations between the kingdom and vampire territories had improved dramatically, thanks in large part to Thea's diplomatic efforts. She had become a bridge, translating cultural nuances and facilitating understanding between two very different worlds. The meeting was held in neutral territory, a conference center designed specifically for human-vampire negotiations. Sarilith attended with her full court, a display of power and prestige that made the council visibly nervous. Thea stood at Sarilith's right hand, dressed in formal attire that blended human professional wear with vampire court elegance, a compromise that represented her dual role perfectly. The council apologized again, more sincerely this time, for the original disrespect. They proposed new trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and enhanced security protocols to prevent future incidents. Sarilith listened with regal composure, occasionally glancing at Thea for her assessment. When the formal proceedings concluded, the council leader, a woman named Director Hartley, approached Thea privately. "You've done well," Hartley said stiffly. "Better than we anticipated when this began." "Thank you," Thea replied, keeping her tone neutral. "Some in Ashridge still see you as a traitor. Others see you as a hero. I thought you should know the city is divided about your choice." Thea considered this. "I did what I thought was right. I still believe that. If some people can't accept it, that's their problem, not mine." Hartley nodded slowly. "The Vampire King seems quite taken with you. Is that relationship professional, or—" "That," Thea said firmly, "is none of your business." She walked away before Hartley could respond, returning to Sarilith's side. The Vampire King looked at her with obvious affection, and Thea felt warmth spread through her chest. This was where she belonged. Not in Ashridge, constrained by politics and prejudice, but here, building something new and necessary alongside someone who saw her true worth. That night, back at Ravencroft Manor, Sarilith took Thea's hand and led her to the roof, a flat section with a magnificent view of the surrounding countryside. The moon was full, casting silver light across everything, and the stars blazed overhead. "I have something for you," Sarilith said, producing a small box from somewhere in her gown. Thea opened it to find a ring, not an engagement ring exactly, but something more. It was silver, set with a deep red stone that seemed to glow with inner light, and engraved with symbols Thea recognized as ancient vampire script. "This is a protection ring," Sarilith explained. "It bears my seal, my mark. Anyone who sees this will know you are under the direct protection of vampire royalty. It will keep you safe when I cannot be at your side." "Sarilith, this is—" Thea was overwhelmed, tears pricking her eyes. "It is also," the Vampire King continued softly, "a promise, if you choose to wear it. A promise that I am committed to you, to this relationship, for as long as you will have me. I know humans have their own customs for such things, and this is not quite the same. But in vampire culture, this ring signifies a bond, a declaration of intention." Thea looked at the ring, then at Sarilith, at the vulnerability in those ancient red eyes. "You're asking me to commit to you?" "Officially. I am asking if you can see a future with me. If you want to build something lasting despite all the complications and challenges." Sarilith took the ring from the box, holding it delicately. "I am asking if you love me, Thea Patterson, because I love you. Deeply, completely, with an intensity that terrifies me." Thea's tears spilled over then, not from sadness but from the sheer overwhelming emotion of the moment. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it. I love you too. It's insane and impossible and completely wonderful. I want a future with you, whatever that looks like." Sarilith slipped the ring onto Thea's finger, and it fit perfectly. Then she pulled Thea into her arms, kissing her with centuries of longing and newly discovered hope. They stayed on the roof for hours, wrapped in each other, talking about dreams and plans and all the ways they would navigate their unusual relationship. "I will age," Thea said at one point. "I'll grow old while you stay exactly as you are. That's going to be strange." "I have thought about that," Sarilith admitted. "There are ways, if you wish, to extend human lifespan. Vampire blood, taken regularly but carefully, can slow aging significantly. Or, if you ever desired it, I could offer you immortality. Turn you, though I would never pressure you toward that choice." Thea shivered at the thought. Becoming a vampire, it was a huge decision, one she wasn't ready to make. But knowing the option existed, that Sarilith was thinking about their long-term future, meant everything. "Let's take it one day at a time," she said. "I'm happy being human for now, and we have plenty of time to figure out the rest." "One day at a time," Sarilith agreed. "I can live with that." The months turned into a year. Thea's role as ambassador grew more influential. Her medical clinic expanded to serve 3 nearby villages, and her relationship with Sarilith deepened into something profound and unshakable. They navigated challenges together: political conflicts, cultural clashes, moments of doubt and fear, but they always came back to each other, to the connection that had started with a desperate attempt to prevent destruction and had grown into genuine transformative love. Serelith became more open, letting Thea see beyond the regal facade to the person beneath, someone who loved art and music, who had a dry sense of humor, who sometimes felt lonely despite being surrounded by court. Thea introduced her to modern medicine, to human resilience and ingenuity, to the beauty of a life lived with urgency and passion because of its brevity. They balanced each other. Serelith's ancient wisdom and power complemented Thea's modern compassion and determination. Together they became a force for positive change, improving relations between humans and vampires, establishing new protocols that protected both species, creating a model for coexistence that other territories began to adopt. 2 years after that first confrontation at the gate, Ashridge formally recognized Thea's contributions with a ceremony honoring her diplomatic work. She attended with Serelith at her side, both dressed in formal attire that represented their unique bond. The same square where protesters had once demanded justice now celebrated the woman who had made it possible. Morrison, Collins, and Warren had faced vampire justice, not death, as many had feared, but servitude. They worked in vampire territories now, under strict supervision, learning firsthand about the culture they had once disrespected. It was a punishment that fit the crime, educational rather than purely punitive. During the ceremony, Thea gave a speech about courage, respect, and the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was difficult or dangerous. Children in the audience looked at her with wide eyes, seeing her as a hero. Adults who had once been skeptical now nodded in agreement. And through it all, Serelith stood nearby, her red eyes never leaving Thea, pride and love radiating from her like heat from a star. Afterward, they returned to Ravencroft Manor, home now, truly home for them both. They walked through the gardens hand in hand, Thea's warmth contrasting with Serelith's coolness, creating a perfect balance. "Are you happy?" Serelith asked suddenly. Thea stopped walking, turning to face the Vampire King fully. "Incredibly. Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." Serelith cupped Thea's face with both hands, her touch reverent. "You came into my life like a storm, unexpected, powerful, impossible to ignore. You challenged me, infuriated me, impressed me, and ultimately changed me. I am better because of you." "You saved me too," Thea said softly. "I was going through the motions in Ashridge, doing good work but feeling incomplete. This life with you, it's given me purpose, meaning, and love beyond anything I imagined." They kissed under the stars, vampire and human, king and ambassador, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds. The night was cool and perfect, filled with possibility. Over the following years, their bond only strengthened. Thea eventually made the decision to accept Serelith's blood, slowing her aging process significantly. Not immortality, not yet, she wasn't ready for that step, but enough to give them more time together. Decades instead of just years. They traveled together, visiting vampire courts across the world, establishing diplomatic relations and sharing their model for human-vampire cooperation. They faced opposition sometimes from both sides, but they faced it together. Serelith's power and Thea's compassion proved an unstoppable combination. And in quiet moments, when the diplomatic work was done and the court had dispersed for the evening, they would retreat to their private chambers, enhanced now with both medieval grandeur and modern comfort. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing, or simply exist in comfortable silence, Thea reading medical journals while Serelith worked on correspondence. Sometimes Thea would wake in the middle of the night to find Serelith watching her sleep, those red eyes soft with affection. "I am memorizing you," the Vampire King would whisper. "Every moment, every detail. Because even with all the time we have, it will never be enough." And Thea would pull her close, bringing warmth to cool skin, and promise, "Then we'll make every moment count." They built a life together that defied convention but felt absolutely right. Serelith remained the Vampire King, powerful and respected, but she was also simply Sarah to Thea in private moments, vulnerable, affectionate, surprisingly playful. Thea continued her medical work, saving lives and training others, but she was also the king's beloved, a title whispered with respect and sometimes envy throughout vampire society. 10 years after that fateful night at the gate, they stood together on a balcony, overlooking a city that had learned to embrace both human and vampire residents. Integration was slow, difficult work, but it was happening. The world was changing, becoming better because two people had refused to accept hatred and disrespect as inevitable. "Do you ever regret it?" Serelith asked, her arm around Thea's waist. "Leaving your old life? Taking this path?" Thea leaned into her embrace, feeling the familiar cool strength of the woman she loved. "Not for a second. Every choice I made led me to you. How could I regret that? Even when I am overbearing and possessive, even then, especially then sometimes." Thea laughed. "You love me with everything you have. That's rare and precious. I'm not about to complain about it." Serelith turned Thea to face her, and in the moonlight, She looked exactly as she had that first night, devastating, powerful, beautiful beyond words. But now Thea could see past the regal exterior to the person beneath, the soul that loved her so completely. "I will love you until the stars burn out," Sarilith promised. "In this life and whatever comes after. You are mine, and I am yours, and nothing will ever change that." "Nothing," Thea agreed, and kissed her vampire king under the endless sky. Their story had started with disrespect and threatened destruction, with guards who didn't understand the consequences of their actions, and a nurse brave enough to face a vampire king alone. It had grown into something neither could have predicted: a love story for the ages, passionate and true, bridging worlds that had once seemed incompatible. And it would continue for decades more, through challenges and triumphs, through quiet moments and grand adventures, through everything that life could throw at them. Because they had each other, and that was enough. That was everything. In the end, the guard at the gate had been right about one thing. Sarilith Dravanor was powerful enough to destroy a kingdom, but Thea Patterson had shown her something better: how to build one instead. Together, they created a legacy of peace, understanding, and love that would outlast them both. A testament to what was possible when courage met compassion, when ancient power learned to cherish mortal warmth. Thea wore the protection ring every day, its red stone catching the light, a symbol of the promise they had made to each other. And every evening as the sun set and Sarilith's world awakened, Thea would find her way to the Vampire King's side, where she belonged, where she would always belong. The manor became a place of joy, not just duty. They hosted gatherings that brought humans and vampires together in celebration rather than negotiation. They supported artists and scholars from both communities. They created scholarships for young people interested in diplomatic work. They built bridges, one stone at a time, one relationship at a time. And through it all, their love remained the foundation. On difficult days when progress seemed impossible and old prejudices resurfaced, they would retreat to each other. Sarilith would hold Thea close, cool arms wrapped around warm flesh, and remind her why they fought. Thea would kiss away centuries of loneliness from Sarilith's brow and promise her a future worth living. 20 years after that first meeting, Thea made her final choice. She asked Sarilith to turn her, to grant her immortality, so they could continue their work together indefinitely. It was not an easy decision. She knew what she was giving up, the human experiences she would never have. But she also knew what she was gaining: forever with the woman she loved, eternal partnership in building the better world they both dreamed of. The transformation was difficult, painful, but Sarilith guided her through every moment, never leaving her side. When Thea opened her new eyes for the first time, red as blood and sharp as stars, Sarilith was there, smiling with all the love of 800 years of existence. "Welcome to eternity, my beloved," Sarilith whispered and kissed her newly immortal partner. Together they walked into the night, two vampire queens now, equal in power and united in purpose. The world stretched before them, full of possibility and promise. They would face it together, as they had faced everything else, with courage, with love, with unwavering commitment to making things better. The story that began with anger and threatened violence had become something beautiful. A romance for the ages. A partnership that changed the world. A love that would echo through centuries, inspiring others to believe that differences could be bridged, that understanding could triumph over fear, that one brave choice could change everything. Thea and Sarilith, the vampire queens of Ravencroft, protectors of the peace, champions of coexistence. Their legend would grow over the centuries, told and retold, adapted and embellished. But at its heart, the truth remained simple. Once a guard spat at a vampire king's feet, and a nurse decided that disrespect would not stand. From that moment of courage, from that refusal to accept injustice, grew a love that transcended mortality, a partnership that reshaped the world, and a happiness that neither had dared to dream possible. They had found each other in the darkest moment, and together, they had created light. That was the true magic, not vampiric power or political influence, but the simple, revolutionary act of choosing love over hate, understanding over fear, together over alone. And as centuries passed, as the world continued to change and evolve, their love remained constant. A beacon for others, a promise that the impossible could become real, that bridges could be built even across the widest divides. Thea and Sarilith, vampire and human turned vampire, ambassador and king, partners in all things. Their story was complete, their happy ending earned through struggle and sacrifice and steadfast commitment to each other. And in the quiet moments when they stood together on their balcony watching the moon rise over a world they had helped reshape, Sarilith would take Thea's hand and say the same thing she had said for decades: "I love you beyond measure." And Thea, her red eyes soft with affection, would respond as she always did: "And I love you beyond time." It was enough. It was everything. It was their happy ending, hard-won and deeply deserved, lasting into eternity. The kingdom that had once nearly been destroyed instead became a sanctuary, Ravencroft Manor stood as a symbol of what was possible when courage met compassion, when ancient power learned gentleness, when a nurse brave enough to face a vampire king changed the course of history. And in the halls of that manor, two women loved each other with an intensity that transcended their different origins. They built a life of meaning, purpose, and joy. They proved that happy endings were possible even in the darkest circumstances. Their love story became legend, but to them it was simply life-challenging, beautiful, and absolutely worth every moment. Together, forever, they had found home.